First of all, let me just say I'm so excited to be with you all. There's almost 100 participants on the webinar, and I know we'll get some more folks. That it's almost past 100 now. So my name, let me introduce myself again. My name is Sharon Delente. I am the voting rights strategist at the ACLU of Michigan. I was one of the architects of Proposal 3, Promote the Vote, and I led the team that drafted the constitutional amendment. I am an attorney and I have been an advocate for voting rights here in Michigan for more than 15 years. I'm also honored to say that I'm a member of Michigan's first election modernization advisory committee that was convened earlier this year by Secretary of State Benson. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us this evening. I want to go ahead and move to the second slide. And I wanted to acknowledge all of our partners in tonight's program. There we go. We have some great partners. The whole work of Proposal 3 was full of great partnerships and collaboration. Nothing big gets done without great partnerships. But I want to thank our great partners in this webinar series, which is the Campus Voter Project, the League of Women Voters of Michigan, and Voters Not Politicians. I will admit that tonight on this webinar, you'll hear from me mostly, but as we get into the second and the third webinar, we're going to work to incorporate more of those partners. So this first one is kind of Sharon Delente heavy, but we'll be mixing it up a little bit more in the second and third. I also want to thank Jessica Ayub, the ACLU of Michigan's volunteer engagement strategist, who is my partner in these webinars. You'll hear from her a little bit later. She's managing the webinar. She'll moderate the Q&A. She's making the slides move, so thank you, Jessica. Okay, so let's start with what we all know. We know that 2018 was a huge year for voting rights in Michigan. Huge. Michigan changed the national landscape for voting rights by advancing a bold, proactive voting rights agenda. But before we get to all of that wonderfulness, as you can see on your screen, I want to briefly review how we got there. These, if you saw any presentations from me last year or any Promote the Vote or Proposal 3 presentations, you might have seen these maps. And you've probably heard me say many, many times that Michigan was a national leader in voting in elections in the 1970s and 80s under Secretary of State Richard Austin. But then the state stagnated for many decades. And so these maps represent the state of affairs by 2017. And, you know, I don't think it's overstating it to say by 2017, Michigan citizens were languishing in one of the most restrictive voting regimes in the country. These maps show you how far Michigan had fallen behind the rest of the country. Most of the country allowed citizens to vote early and gave citizens more time to register to vote. These are critical access issues for citizens who want to access the ballot. But the citizens of Michigan in 2017 couldn't do either. They couldn't vote early, and they were not afforded any time within 30 days to register to vote. And after years of trying to move common sense, nonpartisan reforms through the Michigan legislature with no success, it was time to go directly to the people. Beginning in February of 2018, citizens across the state began collecting signatures to put Promote the Vote on the ballot. Yes, it really was February of 2018. It was cold, I'm sure you'll remember, but Promote the Vote secured the necessary signatures and was placed on the ballot as Proposal 3 of 2018. And moving to the next, there we go. Moving to that slide, it won, right? We know that. It won with more votes than any other candidate or ballot proposal. Most significantly, it won in 80 of Michigan's 83 counties. Just let that sink in. That is a resounding victory, and it shows how broad the support was and is among the public for free and fair access to the ballot. I want to pause here to acknowledge the work that so many of you did to advance voting rights in 2018. So this is our first survey or poll of the evening. We want to see how many participants on this webinar tonight, and we are at 100 participants, were engaged in the passage of proposals 2 or 3. Let us know if you collected signatures, if you participated in public education, if you turned out voters, or if you did something else for either proposal. Click one of the options on your screen if you took action to pass proposals 2 or 3. So again, we want to survey you on how many of you were engaged in the passage of proposals 2 or 3. If you took some sort of action, if you collected signatures, if you educated voters, if you raised money or donated money, if you turned out voters, let us know who participated, who's on this call. I'm going to give you just another second or two to see who on the call has already been participating in the fight for voting rights. Again, go ahead and let us know if you were participating last year. So
you haven't told us on the phone how to vote. What numbers do we press?
Oh, well, thank you so much for telling me that. It's supposed to pop up onto your screen, and I'm getting a text at the same time. I see. It should pop up on your screen, and if you are using just the phone, there is not a way that corresponds with pressing a number, so I apologize for that. But I do see the results are coming in. 67% of you gathered signatures. 67% of you educated the public. 50% turned out voters. And another 26% did other things. So that means that this is a really knowledgeable group of people, and I'm so excited to have you back together to continue the work on voting rights. Okay, so on behalf of the citizens of Michigan, of course, let me thank you for the commitment and dedication you had to voting rights in 2018. And I know your commitment continues to today because you're on this webinar. But here's the thing. Proposal 3 wasn't just about changing the rules of voting. For sure, we had to do that because Michigan had fallen so far behind. But Prop 3 was always about much more than just rule changes. Prop 3 was about ensuring full participation in our democracy. We cannot have a government that is of, by, and for the people if only some people have a say. I know I don't have to tell you that a lot is at stake right now. Our democracy, our values, our nation. We need full participation, or pretty darn close to it, if we want to see our governmental priorities align with our values. To ensure full participation of all eligible citizens, we need more than rule changes. First, we need a robust public education campaign about voting rights so eligible citizens can make their voice heard. And some of what we're doing tonight will be that. Second, we need to engage our local election officials to create the most accessible voting system possible. This webinar series will lay out how we can do both, and how, when I say we, that means not just the ACLU of Michigan, not just Jessica and I, not just the other partners, but all of you. You are really the key. Because being an empowered voter is about empowering others. So tonight, I'm not just going to update you on Prop 3, although I will do that. I'm also going to cover the 2 biggest changes to voting in Michigan as a result of Prop 3. And I'm going to do that so that you will be empowered to educate others in your community about voting rights. Let me take just a second to remind you that if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box, and we'll try to answer them during our question and answer period. Okay, so if you are looking on the computer, we have a list of the voting rights that were secured in 2018. There were 8 of them. Most of the rights were secured through the passage of Proposal 3. Online voter registration was passed by the Michigan legislature and signed into law by then Governor Rick Snyder. Register anytime, early voting by absentee ballot, and straight party voting were all implemented for the local elections that were held in May of this year. If you didn't have a local election in your community, many did not, it was a smaller local election, you might not have known that. You might not have gotten a ballot and seen that straight party voting was back on there. You might not have had the opportunity or the reason rather to try and use early voting by absentee ballot for the first time. But in May of 2019, those 3 reforms were all implemented. Obviously, reintroducing the option to vote straight party was simple because it had been removed just last November 2018. I don't want to revisit the saga that was straight party voting. I am just glad it's over and the matter is resolved and that the voters of this state will continue to have that as an option. Register anytime and early voting by absentee ballot are 2 of the biggest changes to voting in Michigan. The right to register anytime and to vote early by absentee ballot will change the ways that voters both register and vote. These 2 reforms also change the way elections are administered by every election official in the state, from the Secretary of State to your local city or township clerk. Michigan has a lot of work to do if we want to ensure that citizens and election officials have fully adapted to these new changes. In a minute, I'm going to go into detail about register anytime and early voting by absentee ballot, as I said, so that everyone on this call can really be fully up to date on these important reforms. But first, let's talk about the other components of the voting rights that were secured in 2018. First, let's talk about automatic voter registration. Under Proposal 3, any eligible citizen who transacts business with the Secretary of State regarding a driver's license or a personal identification card will automatically be registered to vote unless they decline. Implementing this reform has understandably taken some time. In order to implement automatic voter registration, the Secretary of State has to change forms, they have to modify technology, they have to change the practices at all of the Secretary of State branch offices, and it requires training of all those employees who work at the branch offices. The good news is that the new Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, and her staff have been working on this since day 1. I know this because they have engaged the help of the experts on the Election Modernization Advisory Committee. The Secretary of State and her staff have been testing out the new procedures. They've been piloting them. They have been getting feedback from other experts around the country. It's been a lot of work, but I think that work will mean that we see a very seamless transition here in Michigan when automatic voter registration comes on board. And that's expected to come on board at the end of the summer. I'll just note for you that Georgia, as an example, saw a 4-fold increase in the number of new registrations at their driver's license agency when they implemented automatic voter registration. For a variety of very good reasons, we may not reach quite that threshold, but soon we're going to know. Soon we're going to implement automatic voter registration and we're going to see how big of an increase it has. Online voter registration is expected to be launched this fall. The implementation of online voter registration also takes time. The Secretary of State has to build a new portal for online voter registration, and the new system has to be secure against hacking by actors foreign or domestic. Proposal 3 mandated that the results of statewide elections be audited. I'm just going to suggest that we go back in our slides to the one that listed all the proposals in a bullet. Perfect, thank you. Okay, back to the election audit. So Proposal 3 mandated an audit of statewide election results. The next statewide elections will be in 2020, and that's when Michigan will have its first audit of statewide election results. But the state has been active this year in determining what kind of audit Michigan would have. So this year, 3 Michigan communities piloted something called a risk limiting audit. This is a cost-effective and relatively simple method of hand counting a statistically significant sample of ballots to ensure that the results that were recorded by the tabulating machines match what was on the ballots. The ballots are not in any way connected to the voter, so there's not a secrecy issue. It's simply making sure that the machine counted up the marks on the pieces of paper on the paper ballots properly. So that is in full swing, and again, we'll see the results of our first audit in 2020. The provision regarding military and overseas voters to be sent a ballot 45 days mirrors a federal law. By enshrining this in the Constitution, we've protected against any infringement on these rights for military and overseas voters in the future, but no additional changes were needed at this time. Finally, Michigan voters now have an affirmative right to a secret ballot as a result of Proposal 3. This has not necessarily changed voting practices yet, but it strengthens the secrecy protections for voters in Michigan. And I think this is particularly true for voters with disabilities. Let me pause to remind you, if you have questions, you can type them in the chat box. So let's pause here, and I'm going to ask Jessica for a couple of questions. Jessica, will you let us know what questions have been coming in?
Hi, Sharon. Sorry about that. I was talking but muted. So we got a question from Brian asking,
we didn't hear the question.
Yep, you're good. Okay, Ruth Johnson has said that voter registration was over 95% before Prop 3. Is that true, and will automatic registration have an impact if that's the case?
So someone has been paying close attention to the details. That is true. Michigan, for a while, has recorded a voter registration rate in the 90 percentile. I will let you know that the U.S. Census Bureau has very different numbers, in the mid-70s, sometimes up to 80. I am very interested and would love to be able to determine who is right. I think that I have good reasons to believe that the 90+% number that the Secretary of State and former Secretary of State Johnson, but also secretaries before her, quoted is probably not quite accurate. And the reason for that is because the way that that number is determined, that 90% number, is just taking the full size of the voter registration file and dividing it by the full number of voting eligible citizens. And the problem with that is that a voter registration database, the full list, just think of this list of millions of voters, that is a list that is always in flux. It's in flux because people are moving. There are times in which they're moving from one community to another, in which the file will hold them in both places for a short amount of time because they may vote at their old location or they may vote at their new location. There are folks always being removed because they are moving out of state. There are folks being removed because they've passed away. There are folks always coming on board. To just take the plain number of dividing the full size of the file by the voting eligible population, I think is just not specific enough. And I guess the other thing I would say is that the U.S. Census Bureau, this is what they do. This is their business. So I think probably the number is somewhere in between there. And most importantly, that means we have room to grow. So that's my answer for that. Jessica, what else? What other good questions do we have out there?
So we have a question about wanting materials about all of these new reforms.
Okay, that is a great question. Whoever it is who asked, but for everybody, if you can stay with us through this webinar, the second to the last slide has our voting rights website for the ACLU of Michigan, and we'll get to that in a little bit. It looks like Jessica is going to hold, yeah. So we will, the ACLU of Michigan has a voting rights webpage, a whole section of our website that's just dedicated to resources that help folks know their rights. And on there already, as I'm going to talk about, is our comprehensive voting guide. So that gives you, in fact, it's the only comprehensive voting guide that's been produced since the passage of Prop 3 and all these rights. So that is one resource. I will be honest, for those who are used to us having those really cool printed out booklets, we have not printed those yet because this is all kind of new. Online voter registration hasn't come on board yet. We don't want to print things that then become obsolete. So we have an online version right now. That is a great question. Thank you so much. Let's see. I wasn't timing how long. Can we do one more question, Jessica? Do we have one more?
So that is actually all the questions we've got right now.
Okay, great. So we'll keep going. All right. So thanks for those great questions. Let's now look closely at the two most impactful changes to Michigan's voting system. Again, this is register anytime and early voting by absentee ballot. So Prop 3 guaranteed all registered voters, let me say that again, all registered voters equal access to an absentee ballot. And it gave voters the discretion to choose whether to get their absentee ballot in person or by mail. So for voters who wish to obtain their absentee ballot in person, they visit the city or township clerk's office where they are registered to vote. Once there, they complete an application for an absentee ballot, and they are issued an absentee ballot by the clerk or the clerk's staff. They can vote the ballot there in the clerk's office and submit it that day, leave it with the clerk to be processed, or the voter can leave with the absentee ballot and return it to the clerk later by mail or by dropping it off at the clerk's office. Voters who wish to obtain their absentee ballot by mail, or what some are calling vote at home, can complete an application and mail it to their city or township clerk's office. The clerk will then mail the absentee ballot to the voter. The voter then has the choice, again, to mail it back to their clerk's office or drop it off. Secretary of State Benson recently announced that the state would no longer deprive some newly registered voters of an absentee ballot. This I strongly supported. It's the correct interpretation. When Prop 3 granted full and equal access to an absentee ballot to all registered voters, that meant all registered voters. As a result of Prop 3, Michigan is no longer discriminating against some new voters when it comes to voting by absentee ballot. Okay.
Hey, Sharon, can I just pause for a quick second? For those of you who are not muted, could you please go ahead and mute yourself in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen? There should be a mute and unmute option. Okay, Sharon, you're all set.
Great. Okay, so moving on to our next slide. I see someone wrote, I love absentee ballots. That's so exciting. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide and register anytime. So register anytime is actually an innovation that was developed right here in Michigan. The concept is quite simple. I'm just gonna, again, ask folks if you can mute your phone. That would be great because we're getting a little background noise. There we go. Okay, so the concept of register anytime is just as simple as it sounds. An eligible voter should be able to register to vote at any time. There we go. The options for how to register, of course, may vary based on how close we are to the election, but there should always be a method by which an eligible voter can register to vote. Let me just pause for a minute here to be clear about what I mean by eligible voter. All I mean by eligible voter at this point in my presentation is someone who is qualified to register to vote in Michigan. So that is, as you know, someone who is a citizen, someone who is over 18 years of age or will be 18 by the next election, and someone who has lived in Michigan for at least 30 days or will have lived here for 30 days by the next election. So if you meet these three criteria, you can register to vote in Michigan. And after Proposal 3, you can register at any time. So through and up to and including the 15th day prior to an election, eligible citizens who want to register to vote have a lot of options. During this period, they can register to vote by mail, by completing a voter registration form and mailing it to their city or township clerk. They can register to vote in person by visiting a Secretary of State branch office. This will eventually be automatic voter registration in place at those branch offices. During this period, eligible citizens can register to vote in person at their city or township clerk's office or their county clerk's office. During this period, eligible citizens can register to vote in person at designated voter registration agencies. These are offices that provide public benefits and provide services to citizens with disabilities. And once the online voter registration is implemented this fall, eligible citizens will be able to register to vote online through the 15th day before an election. Beginning on the 14th day before the election and through 8 p.m. on election day, voters have one option for registering to vote. During this period, to register to vote, eligible citizens must appear at their city or township clerk's office and provide proof of residency. Let me just say, for some on the phone, they may know that some clerks in the state have what's called a satellite office. For example, the city of Detroit has 2 offices to begin with, and then they have satellite offices. The city of Lansing has a satellite office. So when I say that eligible citizens must appear at their city or township clerk's office, that would include a satellite office. With regards to proof of residency would, of course, include a Michigan driver's license or a personal ID. But voters could also use a utility bill, a bank statement, or any government document with the voter's name and their address on it. So let me just say that again, because those are separate categories. A utility bill, like a cell phone bill, a bank statement, or in the alternative, any government document that has the voter's name and address on it. The address must be in the city or township where the voter is seeking to register. So remember I said register anytime was one of the things that was implemented in May 2019. So let me tell you some of the highlights from that election. More than 700 voters registered during those last 14 days or on election day. Now remember, this was a small election, much lower turnout. But fascinatingly, of these 700 plus voters, 81% were newly registering in Michigan. So that's exciting to me because it's a small local election and you had 81% of these 700 folks who were registering for the first time to vote in a lower turnout, less well-known local election. So of course you would expect many of those new registrations were from younger voters, but the actual breakdown was kind of surprising. 57% of the new registrations during this period in the May election were in fact from 18 and 19-year-olds. But 43% of those individuals who were newly registering ranged in age from 20 to 88 years old. I am proud to report that 12 voters over the age of 70 registered during this period for the first time in Michigan. So I think sometimes when reforms are perceived as to benefit one group or only one group, it's not true. There are individuals across the age spectrum and across a variety of demographic characteristics that benefit from these reforms. A recent op-ed in the New York Times estimated that 100,000 additional young voters will turn out in November 2020 as a result of Register Anytime. The authors estimated that the total number of additional voters as a result of Register Anytime will be 160,000. I think the number will be higher. So when similar reforms have been adopted in other states, the research has shown that voter turnout has actually increased by 5%. Well, if you take the 2016 turnout in Michigan, which was slightly down, it wasn't the highest turnout of the last 3 elections, that would mean an increase of 200,000 additional voters turning out in November 2020. That is a lot of additional voters turning out, even in a high turnout presidential election. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. The next slide explains what happens when you put early voting together with Register Anytime. So this is really the exciting part. Beginning 45 days before an election and through 8 p.m. on election day, an eligible citizen can register to vote and cast an absentee ballot all in one visit to their city or township clerk's office. So let's say that again. There's going to be a 45-day period where people can one stop, go in to the city or township clerk's office where they are residing, register, get their absentee ballot, fill it out, give it to the clerk, be all done with it. The second exciting thing that was actually also required under Proposal 3 is that clerk's offices have to be open, city and township clerk's offices have to be open at least 8 hours the weekend before Election Day. That is slightly more than it was required under the law before, but clerks also can have more than 8 hours. So in a busy presidential year where folks are registering, a whole lot of folks are registering, that weekend before is going to be an opportunity for folks to go in, register, cast their absentee ballot, and take the pressure off the polling locations on Election Day. On Election Day, eligible voters who need to register to vote can go into the city or township clerk's office, register, and cast an absentee ballot. So let me clarify here. If you are a person who needs to register to vote, let's say I moved to Kalamazoo and I need to register either for the first time, I've never registered in Michigan, or I need to register in Kalamazoo because I used to be registered in Detroit, which is where I am currently registered. I can go into the clerk's office on Election Day, handle that registration, and get an absentee ballot. But if you are a person who's already registered in Kalamazoo, you're already registered, you're good to go, you need to go to your polling location. So people who are already registered in Michigan should not go to the clerk's office. They cannot go and get an absentee ballot because we have a whole system of polling locations to serve those voters. So let me pause again here. I've gone through a lot more meat of register anytime and early voting by absentee ballot. And let me see if we have more questions. Jessica?
Thank you, Sharon.
Oh, yes, I see we have lots of questions, so go ahead.
Yeah, we've got lots. So one of the questions is, can you apply for an absentee ballot at the same time that you register to vote?
Can you apply for an absentee ballot at the same time you register to vote? Yes, that is the concept of what happens when you put no reason absentee voting or early voting by absentee ballot and register anytime together. You can go into a clerk's office, handle your registration, and get an absentee ballot at the same time.
And we have a couple of questions about how folks can get an absentee ballot now, and if there are any restrictions on who can access it. So I will let you take that one because it was a huge victory.
Yeah. So now any registered voter in Michigan, once you are a registered voter, you have a right to an absentee ballot. So I know that there has been a lot of there were a lot of issues, particularly for young people and people who were away, perhaps at school, and they were a new registrant. Michigan made it very, very difficult for you to get an absentee ballot for some of those newer registered voters. That is no longer the case. If you are a registered voter, Prop 3 could not be more clear. If you are a registered voter in Michigan, you can get an absentee ballot, and you get to choose whether you get it by mail or in person. And let me just say one more thing about that. I outlined sort of what I consider to be kind of the more traditional route of how you would do it in person and how you would do it by mail. But there's a lot of opportunity to mix and match that, right? You could go in and request it in person, but ask them to mail it to you. You could ask them to mail it to you and then drop it off in person. You don't have to stick with one process or the other. The critical thing is you got to get that ballot back into the hands of your clerk by 8 p.m. on Election Day. So what other questions do we have?
It's a good question. Folks are wondering about this infamous permanent absentee list. Can you explain that?
Yes. I wasn't thinking I would have to touch on that tonight, but that is really great. And let me just say, I'm going to talk some about this in the next webinar. So if you want to know not just what the permanent absentee list is, but the power of clerk engagement around the permanent absentee list, you want to tune in next time. So the permanent absentee voter application list, I see someone described it in the chat box, and that is really a great way to describe it. What it means is that you are signing up to get an absentee ballot application. Let me say that again. You are signing up to be on a list to get an application sent to you for every election. It is not an automatic sending of an absentee ballot. We do not have that system in Michigan. You cannot join a list to automatically be sent the absentee ballot. You can be on a list to be automatically sent the application for the absentee ballot. But this is really impactful because it means that the city clerk or the township clerk is triggering the process of reminding you that an election is coming up, and that can be really hugely impactful. If something comes in the mail, especially I think for a small local election, you may not have been paying attention, you know, there may be something, maybe a bond issue, and you might not have known about it. That application coming in the mail to you will signal that to you. So any other burning questions, Jessica, or should we keep going?
So that was a big question, Sharon. And before I ask this last question, I do just want to make the plug that we will be sharing out the slides and recording after the webinar. So look out for that in your email. And this last question, Sharon, is if I am a canvasser, can I have a stack of copies of the absentee ballot application and pass them out to folks?
So I'm glad that the question was very specific. As you all may know, there can be some restrictions around who can handle other people's applications and other people's absentee ballots. And I don't want to go through all of the contours of that tonight, but I want you to know, and so this question that the canvasser put forth was really a great one because the person was clearly aware that they needed to understand whether there were restrictions here. So you can print off the Secretary of State's website or your local city or township clerk, and you can hand out blank forms. Because it would take some time to explain exactly what you can do in terms of completed forms, I'm going to leave that to another day. But one of the things I can tell you is that, remember I mentioned that website earlier, our ACLU voting website. And so on that website, I'm going to be putting a sort of comprehensive guide to all these canvassing questions that come up, which are very different than the questions that voters have. So that is coming. I know those questions are really important, and I know people want to make sure that they're doing everything right. So that is coming. Keep your eyes on that website. Okay, so thank you, Jessica, for those questions. That's all the time we have tonight to answer questions, but I want to remind you, if you have a question that didn't get answered, please feel free to put it into the chat box because Jessica and I will be trying to follow up on some of those if we can do that in a follow-up email afterwards. Okay, so we are on slide 9 where, yes, so I want to tell you about 2 very important resources you can consult if you have questions about voting rights in Michigan that I did not answer tonight. The first, as I mentioned, is the ACLU of Michigan's voting rights page on our website. It is pretty simple. It is www.aclumich.org/voting. Again, that's www.aclumich.org/voting. So if you go to the site, you can find, as I mentioned earlier, our comprehensive Know Your Voting Rights Guide. This is the first and only comprehensive guide to voting rights that has been published since all these changes were made. It has answers to so many questions. I call it the encyclopedia. Some might not want to have an encyclopedia, but it's good to have an encyclopedia out there that you can consult. So it really covers so many questions. And I encourage you, if some sort of question comes up that we didn't cover or you're having trouble answering, check out aclumich.org/voting and our comprehensive Know Your Rights guide there. We will update the guide as changes happen, like online voter registration becomes available. So I encourage you to check the site regularly and don't print 100,000 copies of it. So just a little warning there. As I mentioned, we are going to add other materials to that site. Upcoming, as I said, is going to be a comprehensive guide to absentee voting, especially hitting on those points for canvassers. And just a little plug here. The way that I learned or really got clear that we needed that guide for canvassers was because people reached out to Jessica and I at the ACLU and asked me questions. In the flurry of a week, I had a bunch of people ask me questions about what they could do and couldn't do. And so that is why the questions that you put in the chat box for us are so helpful. So please keep telling us the questions you have. And it allows us to influence the materials that we're producing. It tells us what people need clarity on. Another guide that we're going to be putting out and we'll be posting on this website is a guide to the voting rights of those touched by the criminal legal system. Prop 3 didn't necessarily change components of the voting rights of those touched by the criminal legal system. Some may be unhappy with that. That's the fact. That is what it is. But one of the problems with that area is there's so much misinformation. So we are going to really be doing our best this year to work, and I've already started to work with a variety of different partners about clarifying the misinformation, dispelling the myths, making sure that, again, those sort of canvassing questions about how do you canvass individuals who are perhaps being held pretrial in a jail. We're going to be working on all of that because it's not necessarily a change, like I said, as a result of Prop 3, but it's something we need to change. We need to make sure that that misinformation is no longer perpetuated here in Michigan. So the second resource on our website is our voting rights email address. So if you had a question, if you consulted the full comprehensive Know Your Voting Rights guide and you still couldn't get the question answered, you could send us an email at votingrights@aclumich.org. Again, that's votingrights@aclumich.org. Okay. Moving on to the next slide. We are almost out of time, so let me tell you a little bit about the next webinar in the series. And we're going to have one more survey question, so don't go anywhere. The next webinar is on clerk engagement. Excuse me. What is clerk engagement? You might be asking, or maybe you're not. I don't know. But don't be shy. You're not the only person on this webinar asking that questions.
Sharon, before you explain it, I just want to say the chat box. For those of you asking those very, very specific questions about the role of clerks, tune into this webinar. Sharon, we have got a super informed electorate in this chat box right now, asking lots of questions about our clerks.
Okay, that's great to hear. I know that all those folks are going to be on the next webinar. Okay, so here we go. So what is clerk engagement? Well, in Michigan, city and township clerks have primary responsibility for administering elections. Okay, that means that the fate of Prop 3 lies not just in the Secretary of State, who, appropriately, I think folks, they run big campaigns, and so most folks know who the Secretary of State is. But the fate of Prop 3 really lies in the hands of more than 1,500 city and township clerks across the state. And a little shout out, I know we have at least one of them on this call I saw earlier. So it's not always understood in Michigan that it's actually your local city or township clerk that has primary responsibility for administering elections. And again, that the fate of Prop 3 lies very much in their hands. As I said, the Secretary of State creates policies and practices and technology, but the Secretary of State does not administer elections at the local level. The Secretary of State has limited impact on your experience of going to your polling location. It is the city or the township clerk, depending on where you live, who runs elections in your community. Your city or township clerk is the one who decides how many poll workers they will have in the polling location. It is your city or township clerk that decides how much public education and voter registration activities she or he will do in your community. And it is your city or township clerk who decides whether or not to offer evening hours for citizens to register and vote close to the election. So if we want to ensure full participation in our democracy, I said in the outset that we needed a robust public education campaign, but we also must engage our city and township clerks. So now we're going to do our second survey question of the evening. Please let us know if you are planning to attend the next webinar on clerk engagement. Even if you haven't signed up yet, or you have a conflict and you'll have to watch it as a recording, that's fine. Tell us if you want to attend the next webinar about clerk engagement. And I'm going to tell you some of the things that we'll cover in that while you're picking your selection on your screen. We will talk about what is in the discretion of city and township clerks. What flexibility do they have? Where can they make adjustments that are appropriate and again, within their discretion to serve the citizens of their community? We will talk about, I will share my 15 plus years of experience engaging with clerks. And I will try, as I learned again from some great questions by folks out there, that people don't necessarily, citizens don't necessarily know how or why a clerk would make one decision or another. What are the constraints that clerks are operating under? What are the priorities that they have to focus on? What are the other restraints and limitations that they have based on the law? So our webinar will really go into that. So let's see how we're doing on our survey. Again, the survey question is, are you planning to attend the next webinar on clerk engagement? And I'm watching the responses come in, and 98% of you are planning to attend. That is so great. You're all very excited about clerk engagement. You can tell I am too. Okay, so I was going to say for anyone who's still unsure, let me say this, but this is helpful for everyone. There is going to be record turnout in 2020. You can quote me on that. You can go to the bank on that. I'm sure my clerk friends who are on this are of the same mindset. The 2018 historic turnout is going to continue into 2020. And we need our election systems to run like a well-oiled machine. Citizens expect that, and they are entitled to that. And I know that clerks feel that way. To ensure we can effectively serve the record turnout we hope to see in 2020, we must collaborate closely with our city and township clerks. They need our help, and we certainly need theirs. You won't have to do it alone. Clerk engagement is most effective when done in collaboration with other organizations and individuals in your community. With all interested parties moving in the same direction, we can ensure the full democratic participation that we seek. And that was really the goal of Prop 3. In our next webinar, as I said, we'll share best practices for clerk engagement. We'll talk about the scope of the discretion that city and township clerks have to implement certain things. I will talk about some of the promising innovations adopted by local clerks in some communities, including the permanent absentee list, and I'll share my lessons from more than 15 years of engaging with clerks. Clerks are local officials committed to serving their communities. I find them to be a lot more approachable, with all due respect to individuals in the state, House, and Senate. I find them to be much more approachable. Nearly all genuinely want to ensure every eligible citizen can cast their ballot. I really want to emphasize that. I have not met a clerk who wanted to disenfranchise voters. So that means that they want to work together. And they actually often already have extensive experience partnering with organizations and individuals in their community. And so perhaps this clerk engagement that we're talking about right now will just be an expansion of great engagement and collaboration that we've already had. But as I said, clerks are receptive and interested in collaboration with the citizens they serve. They need citizens. They have to hire and train many individuals to work the polls and be a part of the election process, and so they are very much engaged in the community. So Engaging city and township clerks is a crucial step to us realizing the full promise of Prop 3. I hope you'll join me next Wednesday at 7 p.m. to learn how you can engage with the clerk in your community. A few quick reminders. If you haven't already done so, remember that you need to register for the second and third webinars. You do that by going to the same link you used to register for tonight and choosing the dates for the subsequent session from the drop-down menu. Please feel free to spread the word about these webinars. Participants can join the second or the third webinar even if they miss tonight's session. We will send you an email after this session with a recording of tonight and a reminder to register for the next 2 sessions. And anyone who missed tonight's session could view that recording and be fully up to speed. I want to thank Jessica Ayub, again, the ACLU's volunteer engagement strategist. I can't do anything without Jessica. I also want to thank Dana Chickless, who created our awesome graphics and did all our communications. And of course, I want to have a big shout out and a thank you to our partners on this. And you'll be hearing more from them in the subsequent webinars. That, again, is the Campus Voter Project, the League of Women Voters of Michigan, and Voters Not Politicians. Thank you all for your commitment to ensuring we have a voting system that works for all. I hope to talk to you next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Have a wonderful evening.